When I finally escaped my mother, she told everyone I seduced her therapist, and the courtroom went silent. I used to think my mother was just lonely, hurt, maybe after everything that happened with my dad, but I was wrong. Loneliness doesn't turn someone into a predator. It doesn't make them study your boyfriends like puzzles waiting to be solved, like prey waiting to be lured. Dana didn't just flirt with boys who came to our house. She seduced them with methodical precision, like she had something to prove every time. We lived in a nowhere town in southern Arizona, where summers burned asphalt and secrets dried up fast. My dad, Raymond, left when I was 14. He didn't take anything, not even his wedding ring. One night, he just left a note on the kitchen counter and vanished. Dana told anyone who would listen that he abandoned us for a woman from work. She left out the part where she used to scream at him so loud the neighbors could hear, or how I once saw her throw a glass that shattered on his back. He was never allowed to speak. Not to the police, not even to me. When I found the courage to ask, she told me he left because I took his side, that I made him think she was unstable, that I ruined everything. The first time it happened, I was 15. A boy named Bryce came over to work on a science project. He was quiet, sweet, a little awkward, just the kind of kid you hope your first crush will be. Dana walked in wearing skin-tight jeans and a tank top cut so low it barely passed for clothing. She bent over in front of him, pretending to look for her reading glasses for 5 full minutes. Bryce could barely form sentences after that. A week later, I walked into the kitchen and found them kissing like nothing in the world existed but their mouths. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She smiled, touched my face, and said, "You're too young to understand how fragile desire can be." Then she blamed me for bringing temptation into the house. I told myself it was a one-time mistake, that Dana just had a breakdown. But it kept happening. By the time I was 17, she had moved on to Eli, my prom date, the only boy I ever really cared about. I had hidden our relationship as best I could, different schools, no tagged photos, no sleepovers. I even warned him in advance that my mother was going through a phase, that he should be polite but distant. He tried. God knows he tried. But Dana noticed everything. One corsage receipt left in my glove compartment, and suddenly she was cooing about prom memories, offering to help with makeup, insisting on photos. She clung to him in every shot. When we tried to leave, she made a scene about feeling old and forgotten. Eli hugged her to be polite. She held on like she was drowning, and he was the last thing afloat. 3 days later, his best friend sent me a blurry photo from the McDonald's drive-thru. Dana in the driver's seat, Eli beside her, laughing. I called him. No answer. I drove home, heart pounding, and found them curled together on our couch, half-dressed, her perfume heavy in the air. She wore my favorite necklace. He looked ashamed, but not surprised. Dana just smiled through tears, said something about how Eli made her feel alive again. He reminded me what it was like to be wanted, she whispered, as if I was supposed to thank her for the honesty. I tried reporting her more than once. Our town had one tiny police station manned by men who still drank coffee from mugs that said, "Support your local sheriff." I showed them screenshots, texts she'd sent to Bryce and Eli, even a few inappropriate selfies. One of them, Officer Connell, just leaned back in his chair and said, "Wish my mom looked like that when I was that age." They didn't even file a report. After that, I stopped bringing people home. I told Dana I wasn't seeing anyone. Meanwhile, I kept dating in secret. No photos, no phone calls, just quiet hours at the town library or the old park near the reservoir. By 18, I was with someone new. Lucas was kind, thoughtful, not like the others. He went to school 2 towns over. I told him my mom was unstable, that he couldn't meet her. He believed me. He even joked that he'd pretend I didn't exist in public if that's what it took to keep her away. It almost worked. I was so careful. I never brought him home, never used his name in texts. But one day, she found a receipt from a tux rental in my car, his name printed right next to mine. It was for the spring formal at his school. That night, she sat on the couch like a queen and said, "You know I used to be prom queen myself." I didn't answer. The night of the dance, she insisted on doing my makeup. I tried to say no, but she wouldn't hear it. Just a few photos, For memories, she said. I stood in the backyard while she snapped over 50 pictures, most of them with Lucas. She adjusted his tie, touched his chest, complimented his arms. He smiled politely, his eyes begging me to end it. I pulled him away before she could start crying about her ruined youth. Later that night, I checked my phone. Lucas had blocked her. Or so I thought. 2 days later, I got a message from his cousin. A blurry shot of Dana and Lucas at the lake, sitting on a bench. Her head rested on his shoulder, his hand on her thigh. I didn't even cry. I just stood in my room, staring at the photo like it was proof the world was designed to betray me. When Lucas finally confessed, he claimed she'd been texting him for days. He said he tried to resist, but she knew what to say. He called it a moment of weakness. I called it the end. After that, something broke in me. Not like a bone snapping clean. More like glass cracking in 1,000 invisible lines. I couldn't fight her directly. The police didn't care. The school counselor thought I was jealous. So I started planning. And I waited for the right moment to take everything back. I didn't go to prom that year. I couldn't bear the thought of smiling through photos while wondering if Lucas was texting her again. Instead, I spent that night driving around town with no destination, windows down, music up, trying to drown out the silence inside me. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let her win anymore. Not by crying, not by hiding. If she wanted to play psychological games, I'd learn to beat her at her own. It started with Dr. Langston. He was the therapist Dana had been seeing for years, her so-called soul doctor, as she liked to put it. Every week, she'd return from her sessions glowing like she'd been baptized. He really understands the complexity of trauma, she'd tell anyone who'd listen. And by complexity, she meant her own performance art. The crying, the shaking hands, the story of how a cruel man destroyed her youthful innocence and left her to suffer in silence. What she didn't say, what no one ever knew, was that Dana had been paying him cash for every session, that he wasn't licensed anymore, and that he conducted his therapy like a private club for women who needed someone to validate their worst behaviors. I found out by accident. One afternoon, she came home early and dropped her purse on the floor. Her appointment receipt slipped out, paid in cash, no office logo, no billing code. I Googled the address. The reviews were scrubbed, but I found a cached forum post calling him a risk to young clients. That's when it hit me. If Dana trusted him enough to bear her twisted truths, then maybe I could use him too. The next Thursday, I waited until she left for her weekly hair appointment. I borrowed a hoodie from a friend, tucked my hair into a baseball cap, and walked into Langston's office under a fake name. The receptionist didn't care. She barely glanced at my ID. I paid cash and filled out the intake forms using every line Dana had ever used on me. When Langston opened the door, he didn't recognize me. Not then. He smiled, offered me a cup of tea, and led me into an office that smelled like cologne and lavender. I positioned my phone carefully in my hoodie pocket, screen recording on. Then I started talking. My mother's been ruining every relationship I've ever had. I told him, letting my voice crack slightly. She uses emotional manipulation, guilt, seduction, anything to make herself the center of attention. Langston nodded like he'd heard it all before, but his eyes stayed locked on my face like he was studying something. I fed him lines Dana had rehearsed in front of the mirror. Emotional terrorism, weaponized vulnerability, toxic dependency. Every time I said a word she'd once used. His pen moved faster. After 40 minutes, he leaned in slightly and said, "Given the trauma you've described, I'd like to suggest we meet twice a week. It's important to create a safe space for you." His hand lingered on mine when he walked me to the door. I left feeling like I'd touched a live wire. When I got home, Dana was already suspicious. She said I smelled like lavender and coffee. I said I was at the library. She said the library closed early on Thursdays. I mumbled something about a study group and disappeared into my room. She didn't believe me, but she didn't have proof. Not yet. That weekend, she cornered me in the kitchen holding a receipt from a coffee shop near Langston's office. "This isn't near the library," she said, voice syrupy sweet and loaded with accusation. "I went with some classmates. It was nothing." "Don't lie to me," she hissed, stepping closer, her perfume clouding my thoughts. "I know when you're hiding something." That's when she dropped the bomb. I installed a tracking app on your phone. For your safety, of course. My stomach turned cold. She was watching my every move. The next week, she insisted on driving me to the library herself. I had no choice but to play along. She waited until I walked inside, then drove off. I slipped out the back and caught the 210 bus to Langston's office. This time, I was late, flushed and breathless when I arrived. Langston barely noticed. He offered me water and said, controlling parents often interfere with progress. You're doing well, Rachel. He sat closer this time. Our knees nearly touched. Have you considered that your mother's behavior might escalate as she senses you pulling away? I didn't need to imagine it. I was living it. And it was only getting worse. By now, Dana had turned full-blown obsessive. She called my friend's parents, asking if they'd seen me. She demanded the library pull security footage to prove I wasn't there. The elderly librarian called me afterward, whispering, "Honey, your mom's watching the bus stop now. Be careful." After one of my sessions, Langston offered to walk me to the back exit of the building, saying it was safer. When we reached the alley, he stopped, glanced around, and said, "Maybe next time we meet somewhere less formal, somewhere we can talk freely. Coffee, perhaps?" His wedding ring was gone. His voice low, intimate. I agreed, knowing Dana was probably lurking somewhere nearby, watching. Back home, I found her in my room, rummaging through drawers like she had every right. "I'm worried about you," she said, holding up a crumpled receipt from my trash can. "This isn't just a study group. I know where you've been." I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. "You don't get to have secrets from me," she growled, her nails digging into my wrist. "Not after everything I've sacrificed." The bruise bloomed like a flower by nightfall. I photographed it from every angle. I visited urgent care the next morning and lied through my teeth about reaching for a book on a high shelf. The doctor looked at me like she didn't believe a word, but she documented everything anyway. That's what I needed, a paper trail. 2 days later, Dana prepared pancakes shaped like hearts. She wore a pink cardigan and a soft smile, trying to reset the clock. "We should see Dr. Langston together," she said, voice trembling with faux concern. "Maybe a family session would help us understand each other again." I said yes, keeping my wrist tucked beneath the table. She looked relieved. She had no idea I was about to set everything on fire. Langston's office looked different with Dana sitting beside me, draped in one of my dresses, her perfume heavy in the air like some kind of warning. She sat just close enough to him that her knee brushed his occasionally. It wasn't an accident. Her entire posture was rehearsed, angled toward him, but her words aimed at me. I could practically see the script in her eyes. "Rachel's been secretive," she said, with a soft, mournful sigh. "Withdrawn. Defiant. I think she's forming unhealthy attachments with older men. There's a pattern." Langston's pen hesitated, just for a second. She let the silence stretch. Then added, "It's becoming a concern. She's always been emotionally intense. Competitive. Especially when it comes to male attention." I kept my face still, even as rage boiled under my skin. I knew exactly what she was doing, flipping the script before I could. Langston cleared his throat, trying to maintain some illusion of professionalism. "That's a serious concern," he said. "What makes you think she's pursuing these relationships?" Dana leaned in, her hand grazing his desk, voice lowered to a conspiratorial tone. "It's in the way she looks at men. Her secrecy, her fixation on therapy, particularly yours." She smiled at him like she was offering a gift. The session ended with Langston looking like a man cornered. He suggested we each pursue individual work before attempting another joint session. Dana didn't like that, not one bit. She kept her smile plastered on, but her eyes darkened. As we were leaving, she made her final move. "Dr. Langston," she said, lightly brushing her fingers along his sleeve. "I know this is unusual, but maybe you could come to the house sometime? I could make dinner. Sometimes the home environment reveals so much, don't you think?" Langston hesitated, his face flushing. "That's not typically. For my daughter's sake," she whispered, eyes wide, innocent, calculated. "Please." He nodded slowly. "I'll consider it." Outside, I intercepted him before he reached his car. I kept my voice low but firm. "We need to talk. Alone." He looked around nervously. "That might not be. That woman you just humored? She's seduced half the boys I've dated. And now she's coming for you." He didn't deny it. He didn't defend himself. He just gave me a place and a time. Thursday, 4 p.m., Brevity Cafe. Dana followed me home like a shadow that afternoon. At every red light, I could see her in the rearview mirror, watching, calculating. At home, she cornered me in the kitchen, voice sugary sweet, but her fingers clenched tight. What were you talking to him about? Insurance paperwork. I lied. He said the office was updating files. He's a good man, she said, almost growling. He sees through your manipulations. The irony of that sentence nearly broke me. Thursday came fast. She followed me there too, kept her distance, parked across the street. I picked a window seat so she'd have a clear view of what she was about to lose. Langston showed up looking more nervous than before, his hands shaking slightly as he sat. Your mother's been calling me constantly, he muttered, voice low. 6 times yesterday. She's a predator, I said, matching his tone. Just like you. His face twitched, but he tried to keep his composure. I'm just trying to help. By texting me? By suggesting we meet here? I asked, my voice calm but cutting. How long before you cross the line? Like you're about to with her? He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt like control. I didn't pull away. You're in pain, he said softly. I can help you process it. My phone buzzed. A message from Alicia. Your mom just called me. Said you're seducing your therapist. What the hell is happening? I tilted my phone so Langston could see it. She's watching us, I said, nodding to the silver sedan across the street. She's spinning the story before I can even finish mine. His face went pale. When I got home, the house was full of people, Dana's friends, neighbors, even Aunt May from across town. An impromptu intervention. I stood in the doorway while Dana sobbed into a tissue, telling everyone how worried she was for me. She's been meeting older men, she whispered, and now she's trying to destroy the only therapist who's ever helped me. Aunt May gave me a pitying look. Sweetheart, we just want you to get the help you need. I didn't say anything. I just looked at Dana. Maybe we should talk about Bryce, I said calmly. He was 15 when you kissed him in our kitchen. Or Eli. You wore my necklace that night, didn't you? Told him he made you feel young again. The room froze. Dana's mascara didn't run, but her mask cracked. Just for a second. These delusions, she said, voice shaking. This is exactly why she needs treatment. She's rewriting the past to avoid her own guilt. Then someone else spoke. A new voice. Strong, familiar. I think I believe her. Eli's mother. She stepped forward from the edge of the room. Eli told me something happened back then. He wouldn't say who, but I always suspected. And now, seeing you, it all makes sense. Dana stood up abruptly. I won't be part of this witch hunt. My daughter is sick, and you're enabling her fantasy. She stormed out, but she had no idea how badly she'd just lost control. That night, I got a text from Langston. Your mother canceled all future sessions. I need to speak with you privately. He sent an address, an apartment downtown. His, apparently. I didn't respond. But the next day, I showed up anyway, phone in hand, recorder running. The door to his apartment was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I heard Dana's voice, low, intimate, slurred like honey over poison. She's always been jealous of me, she was saying. Even as a little girl. Always chasing male attention. Her father's, yours, anyone. Langston mumbled something in response, but his words didn't matter anymore. My phone captured every second as Dana leaned in, her voice dropping. She wants everything I have. My clothes, my perfume, even my therapist. Then I saw her, wearing my red blouse, sitting too close, her hand on his chest, and Langston, looking at her not like a doctor, but like a man already lost. I backed away before they saw me, knocking over a potted plant by the stairwell. I didn't stop to explain. I just ran, all the way to my car, all the way to the only person I knew would understand. I drove across town to the office of a man I hadn't seen in almost 5 years. My father. I hadn't seen my father since the night he vanished from our lives without a word, without even a goodbye. But I found his office listed online, a logistics company just past the edge of Tucson. I didn't have an appointment or a plan. I just walked into the reception area holding a notebook and a shaking resolve. The woman at the front desk looked up with polite disinterest, but something shifted when I told her my name. "You're Rachel?" she asked, standing up slowly. "He's been asking about you." She didn't ask me to wait. She led me down the hall without another word, past rows of cubicles and open doors, until we reached a corner office that smelled like coffee and printer ink. She knocked once before opening it. Inside, my father looked older than I remembered. His hair was grayer at the sides, his back slightly hunched, but his eyes, those deep, tired green eyes, locked onto mine like he couldn't believe I was real. "Rachel," he whispered, rising so fast he knocked over his chair. Oh God! I couldn't speak at first. I was afraid that if I did, everything would fall apart. But when he crossed the room and hugged me like he'd been holding that breath for 5 years, something in me cracked wide open. "I know," he said softly, pulling back. "I know what she did to you." I blinked at him, stunned. "How?" "I hired someone," he said. "A private investigator. After I got your text, I've been following from a distance, waiting until I could do something that mattered." He opened a drawer and pulled out a file, thick, labeled, meticulous. Inside were photos, messages, statements from boys she had targeted. She hadn't stopped after me. I wasn't even the last. "She's been doing it to others," he said, voice trembling with rage. "Kids from your old school." One of them was barely 16. Then he pulled out a second file. This one was thinner, but just as damning. Dr. Langston had lost his license 3 years earlier. Not suspended, revoked. He'd been practicing illegally ever since, using cash-only sessions and referrals from women like Dana who didn't ask questions, or who knew better than to ask. "We think she's been helping him find clients," he said. "All single mothers. All isolated. All vulnerable." My hands shook as I flipped through the documents. This wasn't just a twisted affair. It was a coordinated pattern, a system, and I'd been the bait more than once. Then, like some twisted encore, my phone buzzed again. It was a photo. Dana, curled in Langston's bed, half covered by my red blouse. Her eyes locked on the camera, her smile sharp as broken glass. The message beneath it made my stomach turn. "Now you know how it feels to have something stolen." I showed it to my dad. His jaw tightened. "She just confessed. She's too arrogant to even realize it." We drove straight to his lawyer's office. The man was efficient, unshaken, already halfway through drafting a plan by the time he finished his coffee. The police were looped in next. The case would take time, but there was more than enough evidence now: screenshots, recorded conversations, eyewitness accounts. Dana had created a trail of destruction, and I had walked straight through the center of it, collecting every piece. I moved into my dad's house that night. Ashley, his wife, greeted me with a quiet hug and a warm smile. She didn't ask questions. She just helped me bring my bags inside, showed me the guest room they'd already made up. "It's been ready since your last birthday," she said. "We kept hoping you'd come." For the first time in years, I slept through the night without locking my door. The next morning, Dana called me 12 times before noon. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. By the end of the week, the charges were filed. Langston was arrested at his apartment. Dana was picked up later that night trying to leave town. They denied her bail after she shouted in court about how the whole world was conspiring against her. I thought that would be the end of it. But trauma doesn't just stop once the abuser is behind bars. 2 months later, I started working at a victim support center downtown. It was part of a volunteer outreach program my therapist recommended, something to help me rebuild on purpose. Most of the girls I worked with were younger, quieter. But one day, a girl named Leah called in, her voice shaking so hard I had to ask her to repeat herself. "My mom is doing things," she said, "to my boyfriend. She sends him photos." I found the texts. I showed them to a teacher, but no one believed me. She was 16. I kept her on the phone for nearly an hour, listening to her story like it was an echo of my own life. She thought she was crazy. She thought maybe she was jealous. She thought maybe it was her fault. She thought all the same things I had thought. I got her connected to CPS the next day. The school followed protocol. Mandatory reporting, documentation, investigation. Things that should have been done for me but never were. Meanwhile, Dana sat in jail awaiting trial, still convinced she could talk her way out. When the trial began, she wore soft sweaters and barely their makeup. She looked small, vulnerable, apologetic, like someone who could never hurt a soul. The prosecution played a recording from Langston's apartment, the audio where she talked about me, about how easy it was to make boys fall in love with her, how she'd done it for years. The jury didn't take long. Langston was sentenced first, 6 years, no parole. Registered offender status for life. Dana got 22 months for conspiracy, manipulation of a minor, and obstruction. I expected her to scream, to cry, to put on one final show. But when they let her out of the courtroom, she turned to me and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "You're just like me now. Revenge feels good, doesn't it?" She said it like a secret, like a confession, like a curse. And maybe, for a moment, I believed her. But then I looked over at the row of women behind me. Leah's mother, Eli's mother, the investigator, Ashley, my father. I wasn't like her, not even close. For a while after the sentencing, I convinced myself it was over, that she was behind bars, that Langston was finished, and that I could finally live without watching the shadows for familiar outlines. I started therapy again, this time with a real professional who didn't ask to meet for coffee or suggest we work things out over wine and candlelight. I stopped flinching when the phone buzzed. I even went on a few dates. Real ones. With someone who knew the story and stayed anyway. His name was Noah. He worked as a youth counselor and had his own damage to sort through. A father with a drinking problem, a sister who ran away at 16 and never came back. He never asked me to be cheerful or whole. He just showed up, steady and real, without asking for a single piece of me that I wasn't ready to give. Dana wasn't eligible for parole for 16 months. But that didn't mean she disappeared. Not really. She found a lawyer, young, aggressive, someone who clearly thought he could turn my case into a media moment. She sued me for defamation, emotional distress, and loss of future income. My father's attorney laughed when he read the paperwork and said, "This isn't a lawsuit. It's a tantrum in legalese." The judge threw it out within weeks. But it still shook me. Because even locked away, she was still reaching for me, still trying to reshape the story so that I was the villain and she the tragic mother cast aside by an ungrateful daughter. 6 months after her sentencing, a boy from my old high school reached out through a fake account. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I opened the message. There were screenshots, texts Dana had sent him years ago. He'd saved them. All of them. And more disturbing than that, he had recordings. One night, before any of this had gone public, he'd been at our house. Dana had invited him under the guise of tutoring me for biology. He brought his phone out of paranoia, started recording when she pulled out wine, and told him, "We're both adults, emotionally if not legally." He never told anyone, not back then. He said he thought no one would believe him. But now, he wanted to tell his story. And he didn't want to tell it to the police. He wanted to tell it to me. I agreed to meet him, public place, daylight, just to be safe. He showed up looking like he hadn't slept in days, twitchy and pale and unwell in a way I recognized too well. He didn't want to ruin her. He still loved her. And part of him hated me for what I'd done. "You burned her down," he said. "You didn't have to make it so public." "She was burning everyone," I said. "I just showed people the smoke." Then he said something that made my skin go cold. "She told me you'd try to hurt her. She said you'd always been jealous. That you lied about Langston because you couldn't handle being invisible." I stood there, unable to move, my throat tightening like a wire was pulling through it. She made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, if she got arrested, if she couldn't tell her side, I would. He reached into his jacket and handed me a flash drive. Everything. All the recordings. "She said they prove you were the manipulator. That you were the one who started it. If I release them, everyone will know the truth." I stared at him, wondering how many others she'd twisted like this. How many more pieces she'd moved while locked away. This wasn't over. Not for her. And not for me. He stood up suddenly, eyes glassy. "But I don't think I want to do it anymore. I think. Maybe you were the only one who ever said no." He walked away before I could say anything else. I handed the drive to my father's lawyer the next morning. Most of the files were useless, manipulated audio, edited phone calls, stitched together from pieces Dana had likely recorded without my knowledge. But a few of them were real. Disturbingly so. In one of them, she was talking to Langston before the trial. Her voice low, conspiratorial. "She thinks she's smarter than me. But she'll slip. They always slip eventually." Langston laughed, said something about keeping leverage. That was enough to spark a second investigation. Langston, already in prison, had been contacting former clients through third parties. Dana had been coordinating. The boy who gave me the drive agreed to testify once he realized she'd lied to him, too. 2 months later, her parole hearing came up again. I didn't attend. She was denied without deliberation. The final time I saw her was through a car window in the grocery store parking lot. She was thinner, older, and still somehow carried herself like the world owed her applause. She didn't see me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not fear, not guilt. Just a quiet knowing that some stories don't end. They just stop repeating when you walk away.